Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we try to cut through all the noise and get straight to the insights that really matter. In a world that feels like it's constantly changing, just drowning us in information, we often think the key skills are, thinking or knowing stuff. But what if the real superpower, a thing we actually need most, is rethinking and maybe even unlearning? Today, we're diving deep into the really remarkable insights from Adam Grant's book, Think Again, The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know. Here. Our mission really is to unpack why this whole rethinking thing is often so tough. Like, why do we resist it? And then how can we actually get better at it? How can we cultivate it in our own lives? And, what's the ripple effect, the impact it has on our work, our relationships, even just our general well-being? We've really dug into this source material to pull out the most vital bits, the key takeaways, so you can get genuinely well-informed on this, essential topic pretty quickly.
And it really feels like a crucial topic for right now, doesn't it? I mean, we live in this world where our beliefs, our convictions, they can just become so rigid, so brittle. They kind of lock us into these narrow viewpoints. This deep dive, I think, is going to show how that discomfort, the feeling of doubt or uncertainty, how that can actually be your greatest asset. It's maybe the key to navigating those tricky personal choices or professional challenges, even those really deep societal divides we see everywhere.
Okay, so let's jump right in with something that feels, totally counterintuitive. The first instinct fallacy. You know that advice you always get, like on a test, stick with your first answer, your gut feeling.
Oh, yeah. Trust your gut. Everyone says that.
Exactly. But it turns out that's often really bad advice.
Yeah.
A huge review looking at 33 different studies found that in every single one, the majority of times people changed their answers on exams, they went from wrong to right.
Every single one. Wow.
Yeah. It really is often better to change your mind. I mean, I've seen it myself in teaching. Year after year, the students who go back and rethink, they almost always improve their scores compared to those who just, cling to that first instinct.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how that applies beyond just tests. Like, think about how quick we are to update our phones or renovate our kitchens, get new clothes. We want the latest stuff. But when it comes to our knowledge, our opinions, we tend to do this thing psychologists call seizing and freezing.
Seizing and freezing?
Yeah, we kind of grab onto a belief and then we just freeze. We stop thinking. We prefer the comfort of conviction over the discomfort of doubt. It's like we'd laugh at someone still using Windows 95 today, right? But loads of us cling to beliefs that are probably just as outdated.
And the consequences of not rethinking, they can be absolutely devastating. Think about the early days of the pandemic. So many leaders globally were just agonizingly slow to rethink their initial assumptions.
Like it wouldn't reach them or it wasn't serious.
Exactly. First, it won't affect our country. Then, it's no worse than the flu. And then the big one, it's only spread by people with obvious symptoms. Yeah. The human cost of that delayed rethinking, it's immense. Or think about something like the 1978 U.S. Forest Service policy. They had this strict rule, put out every single wildfire by 10 a.m. the next day, period.
No matter what.
Right. And this unexamined assumption, this failure to rethink the policy, it led to tragedies. Like intervening in the Man Gulch fire, even though it was remote, no immediate human risk, just because a rule said so.
And it's not just governments. It happens in business all the time. Look at BlackBerry. I mean, back around 2008, they were worth over $70 billion. But the BlackBerry phone was pretty much their only product.
Right. They were dominant.
Totally. But the CEO, brilliant guy in many ways, he just wouldn't rethink his baby. He couldn't imagine allowing their secure messaging BBM onto other phones.
Which opened the door
for WhatsApp, which later sold for, $19 billion? They completely missed that boat because they wouldn't rethink. And it wasn't just him. Someone high up wrote this anonymous letter saying basically, we all laughed at the iPhone. We thought putting a computer on a phone was stupid. Now we're years behind.
Oof, that's stark.
It really is. And you contrast that with Apple. Their huge comeback, in part, was driven by what people call accelerating rethinking. They were constantly questioning and changing.
So I guess the takeaway here is that rethinking isn't just some innate talent. It's both a skill set and a mindset.
Exactly.
It feels like we probably already have the mental tools, right? We just need to get them out of the shed, maybe dust them off a bit. Okay, that leads us nicely into this, paradox, the unexpected power of doubt. Let's talk Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yes, the confidence versus competence gap.
Right, where people are, less competent, but vastly more confident. The book uses the example of Davy Oddsson, Iceland's central bank governor.
With zero finance background, right?
Yeah.
He did comedy.
Yeah. No training in finance or economics. He'd been prime minister before that, and apparently was so dismissive of experts, he actually shut down the National Economic Institute.
Wow.
And it got to the point where Parliament had to pass a specific law saying central bank governors needed at least a master's in economics, basically just to get him out.
That's incredible.
And he still ran for president a few years later. It's like
Yeah.
he was completely blind to his own limitations.
That blindness to blindness is, it's a powerful thing. Ignorance breeding confidence. Sometimes it's amusing, but it can have really serious results. And the flip side of that is imposter syndrome, where your competence is actually higher than your confidence.
Right.
Like Hala Tomasdottir, also in Iceland, people were petitioning for her to run, clearly showing they had confidence in her, but she still doubted if she was qualified. She was sort of blind to her strengths.
Okay, so if Dunning-Kruger is overconfidence and imposter syndrome is underconfidence,
Hmm.
what's the ideal? Where's the sweet spot?
Well, the book calls it confident humility.
Confident humility. Okay.
Yeah, it's like you have genuine faith in your abilities, you know you can achieve things, but you also appreciate that you might not have the perfect solution right now. Or maybe you're not even tackling the right problem.
So belief in yourself, but also aware of your blind spots.
Precisely. And the research is fascinating. Studies show the teams that are most productive, most innovative, they aren't led by just the super confident types or just the really humble ones. The best leaders actually score high in both. They believe in their strengths, but they're acutely aware of their weaknesses too. They know they need others, they need to learn more to really achieve something great.
That's really interesting. It's not just a feeling, it's a practice.
Exactly. Which leads to this kind of surprising question, can feeling like an imposter sometimes actually be good?
How so?
Well, Basima Tufik at MIT did this study with medical students. The ones who identified as feeling like imposters, they didn't make worse diagnoses,
Yeah.
but they actually had significantly better bedside manner, rated higher on empathy, respect, professionalism.
Really? Why do you think that is?
The thinking is, those imposter feelings, that little bit of doubt, it makes you work harder to connect, maybe. More attentive. And similarly, investment pros who reported feeling like imposters got higher performance reviews.
Okay, that's definitely counterintuitive.
It suggests that those nagging doubts can actually make us better learners. If you worry you don't know enough, you're more likely to seek out other opinions, right? To double-check things. There was another study with charge nurses, the ones who admitted feeling some hesitation about taking the lead role. They turned out to be more effective leaders because they listened more. They sought input from their team.
Wow. Okay, this connects to another idea that sounds totally backwards at first. The joy of being wrong.
Right. Sounds crazy.
Yeah. But apparently, top scientists, Nobel winners, even those super forecasters who predict elections with crazy accuracy, they're not just okay with being wrong sometimes. They're almost thrilled by it.
It's not about trying to be wrong more often, obviously.
No. It's about recognizing that we are wrong probably way more often than we admit.
Yeah.
And the more we deny that, the deeper the hole we dig.
Absolutely. Ray Dalio, the Bridgewater guy, he put it so bluntly. He said something like, if you don't look back at yourself and think, wow, how stupid I was a year ago, then you must not have learned much in the last year.
Ah. Well, that's a good benchmark. So a really key part of getting comfortable with being wrong seems to be detaching your opinions from your identity.
That's huge.
Like you wouldn't want your doctor today to identify as a professional lobotomist
Right.
or a teacher as a corporal punisher, even though those were once, accepted practices.
Times change, evidence changes.
But so many of us define ourselves by our specific beliefs or ideas. I'm X type of political person, or I believe Y economic theory. And that makes it really hard to update our thinking when the world evolves or new evidence comes along. If instead your identity is based on your values, like I value protecting health, or I value helping students learn, or I value justice, then you have the flexibility to change your methods or opinions based on what actually works best to serve those values.
It separates what you believe from who you are.
Yeah, and think about those election forecasters again.
Hey, let's
Jean-Pierre, the military historian, he's apparently changed his political views, his religious views multiple times. That allows him to be, as the book says, passionately dispassionate. He looks for factors others miss, not just the polls.
Doesn't get locked in. Exactly. Or Kirsten Morel, the one with the MIT engineering background, she said basically, there's no upside for me in staying wrong. It's better to change my mind quickly. That feeling of discovery, of surprise, that's a good feeling. It's like their fear isn't being wrong now, it's being wrong in the long run. So they embrace those small, short-run mistakes as learning opportunities.
It reminds me of that Jeff Bezos quote.
Oh, yeah. Which one?
Something like, people who are right a lot listen a lot, and they change their mind a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, but I can still hear people thinking,
Yeah.
admitting mistakes to others. That feels really risky. Like, won't it damage my reputation? What's the psychological block there?
Oh, it's a huge block. It feels incredibly vulnerable, doesn't it? We're wired to protect our image, to look competent. But there's this amazing story about a British physicist, Andrew Lyne. In the early 90s, he announced this huge discovery, found a planet orbiting a neutron star. Big deal.
Okay.
Months later, he realized he'd made a mistake in his calculations. The planet wasn't there. It was an error.
Oh, no.
What did he do?
Oh.
At a major astronomy conference, in front of hundreds of his peers, he got up and admitted the mistake. Laid it all out.
That takes guts. How did people react?
The room gave him a standing ovation. Another astrophysicist called it the most honorable thing I've ever seen.
Wow.
So what does that tell you? Admitting you were wrong, yeah, it takes courage. But it often comes across as honesty, integrity, a real willingness to learn. It can actually build trust and enhance your reputation, not destroy it.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. How does all this apply to, say, disagreements? Interpersonal conflict, trying to persuade someone. We usually think conflict is just bad.
Right. We tend to lump it all together. But Grant makes this great distinction between relationship conflict, the personal stuff, the arguments about who did what, which is usually destructive,
Yeah, it feels bad.
and task conflict, disagreements about the ideas, the work, the process. And that, surprisingly, can be really beneficial.
How so?
Well, a study looked at hundreds of new teams in Silicon Valley, the highest performing teams. They actually had low relationship conflict, but high task conflict right from the start.
So they argued about the work, but not personally.
Exactly. They debated ideas vigorously, and that led to more original thinking, better decisions. As one research team put it, the absence of conflict is not harmony, it's apathy. If nobody ever disagrees, maybe nobody really cares that much. It's interesting, some places even try to cultivate this, like Pixar.
Oh, yeah.
When Brad Bird was directing The Incredibles, he deliberately sought out the misfits, the pirates, people known for being maybe a bit disagreeable, questioning things, being dissatisfied.
He wanted people who would push back.
Precisely. And his team not only made Pixar's most complex film to date, they actually brought it in under budget. Even people who were naturally conflict-averse, like one of the top animators, John Walker, found themselves embracing this task conflict because, as he said, they were involved in something bigger than myself. When the mission matters, healthy debate feels productive, not personal.
That's a great point. It reminds me of another concept from the book, the illusion of explanatory depth.
Ah, the bicycle example.
Exactly. We think we understand how everyday things work, like a bicycle or, even these earbuds I'm wearing. But if someone actually asks you, okay, explain step by step how it works.
You suddenly realize, uh-oh.
Yeah, your understanding is way shallower than you thought.
Yeah.
And that moment of realizing you don't fully get it, that confusion, can be a really powerful trigger for rethinking, for actually learning how it works.
And connecting that to persuasion. My own experience really backs this up. I used to be what a friend kindly called a logic bully.
A logic bully.
Yeah, I'd just pile on the facts, the arguments, the reasons. I figured if I just presented enough evidence, surely the other person would see I was right.
And how did that work out?
Terribly. The more I pushed, the more they just dug in their heels. They might not have had a comeback, but they definitely weren't convinced. They just shut down. It made me realize a good debate, or even just a productive disagreement, it isn't a war you're trying to win. It's much more like a dance. You have to move with the other person.
I love that analogy, a dance, not a war. And it fits with what the book says about expert negotiators. They found these experts rarely go on the attack, trying to tear down the other side's arguments.
Yeah.
But they also don't just play defense.
So what do?
They ask questions. They show genuine curiosity. Like for every 5 comments they made, at least one was a question.
Huh. So they're exploring, not just asserting.
Exactly. It seems less assertive, maybe. But like in a dance, they're leading by letting their partner step forward first. They create that space for understanding.
There's that amazing debate example in the book, too, between Harish Natarajan, a world champion debater, and this 8-year-old prodigy, Deborah Jo Prektit.
Right. How did he approach that?
He didn't try to crush her arguments with logic. His winning move was starting by finding common ground. He literally began by saying, I think we disagree on far less than it may seem.
So finding alignment first.
Yes. He agreed with her on the core problem they were discussing, poverty, before gently questioning her specific proposed solution. It showed respect, it showed openness, and that's what allows for genuine persuasion, for someone to actually rethink their position, rather than just feeling attacked.
And that collaborative spirit, that listening first approach, it comes through so strongly in motivational interviewing.
Definitely.
Like Arnaud, the vaccine counselor in Quebec, he didn't lecture parents, he built trust. He asked permission before sharing info about the measles vaccine.
Permission is key.
Totally. He listened to their fears, then calmly addressed them, explaining how the vaccine works, the lack of an autism link. But crucially, he always affirmed their right to choose.
And the results.
Kids in his area were 9% more likely to be fully vaccinated 2 years later. It worked. Or think of Betty Bygom negotiating with Joseph Kony, the brutal leader of the Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda.
An incredibly difficult, dangerous situation.
Absolutely. And she got him to peace talks, not by arguing or demanding, but primarily by listening, really listening.
Yeah.
She was named Uganda's Woman of the Year for it.
Wow.
And maybe the most striking example is Daryl Davis, a black musician.
The one who talks to KKK members.
Yeah. He's helped over 200 white supremacists leave the KKK, not by debating them, not by converting them, but by having conversations, by giving them, as he says, a reason to think. He met them where they were, listened to them, and created a space where they could start to rethink their own beliefs. Okay, let's broaden out again. How does rethinking apply to group beliefs? And dealing with complexity, tribalism seems incredibly powerful.
Oh, it's intense. The book mentions studies on sports rivalries, like Red Sox versus Yankees fans. Some said they'd rather root for Al-Qaeda than the rival team. Seriously. And brain scans show our reward centers light up when we see our rivals fail. It's deeply ingrained. Group identity, our tribe has to win. It just hardens stereotypes. And trying to downplay the rivalry can even make fans more aggressive. It's a powerful force, no doubt. But there's this interesting counterpoint from astronauts, the overview effect.
Seeing the Earth from space.
Exactly. They talk about looking down and seeing no borders, no divisions, just this single fragile planet we all share.
That must be profound.
It seems to be. And it makes you wonder, maybe applying these broad group stereotypes to individuals is just fundamentally absurd. Research actually suggests there's often more variety within any given group than there is between different groups. The labels we use can obscure more than they reveal.
Yeah, which leads to this idea of the arbitrariness of stereotypes. Remember that UNC versus Duke experiment? Students would help an individual Duke student who needed money, showing empathy one-on-one.
But they still hated Duke fans in general.
Exactly. The stereotype persisted even when contradicted by personal experience. Or that example about Scorpios facing job discrimination in China based on their zodiac sign.
Right, completely arbitrary.
It shows how our cultural truisms, those beliefs everyone shares but nobody really questions, can be super flimsy. They're not like a solid ship built on evidence. They're more like a Jenga tower. Just one little poke, one question can make the whole thing wobble, prompting a rethink.
And this ties into how we handle really complex issues, like climate change. The book points out that framing it purely as the truth versus the deniers, like Al Gore sometimes did, well, that can fall into binary bias.
Binary bias.
Yeah, our tendency to oversimplify complex spectrums into just two opposing sides, black and white, good and evil. What's more, the media often gives disproportionate airtime to the denier viewpoint, making it seem much more prevalent than it actually is.
Which makes people in the middle hesitant.
Exactly. If you think half the people disagree, you might think, well, maybe it's not settled, or why bother acting if there's so much opposition? When the complexity and the nuance disappear, the collective will to act can just evaporate.
So counterintuitively, again, maybe embracing complexity is actually better.
It seems so. Research shows it signals credibility. When journalists, for example, acknowledge uncertainty around a complex topic, readers actually trust them more.
Not less?
Nope, more. And when experts admit doubt, express nuance, they can actually become more persuasive. It catches people off guard, makes them lean in and pay attention to the substance of the argument, not just the certainty of the speaker. We also need to watch out for what Grant calls idea cults.
Idea cults, like...
Groups that cling fiercely to really simplified concepts, even when evidence piles up against them. Think about some fad diets or rigid beliefs about learning styles, or relying solely on one specific personality test.
Okay. Things presented as the one true answer.
Precisely. The red flag he suggests is, if you find yourself saying is always good or is never bad, you may be a member of an idea cult. Reality is usually messier, more nuanced. Appreciating complexity means recognizing that few things are universally good or bad in every single context.
And in those polarized debates, we often hear advice like, try perspective taking. Imagine yourself in their shoes.
Right. Put yourself in their position.
But the book argues that Addison fails. Because, frankly, we're terrible mind readers. We just project our own assumptions onto them.
So just guessing doesn't work.
Apparently not very well. What does work is perspective seeking, actually talking to people, asking them about their views, their reasoning, their experiences. Good scientists don't just guess, they gather data. We should do the same in conversations. Okay, let's bring this home. How does rethinking play out in education and in planning our own lives and careers? I love the story of Erin McCarthy's history class. She gave her students a textbook from 1940.
And they were used to treating textbooks as gospel truth, right?
Exactly. So they were shocked by all the errors, the omissions, the biases in this old book. It forced them to ask, whose story is being told here? Whose is left out? It turned them into little historians, questioning the source, thinking like scientists. It really sparked their curiosity.
That's powerful. And it highlights how important it is to tackle misconceptions early. The book compares learning counterintuitive scientific ideas to learning a second language. The longer you wait, the harder it gets because the old, incorrect ideas become ingrained.
So we should make rethinking a habit.
Yeah. Even just within the family, like we have these myth-busting discussions at home sometimes talking about Pluto not being a planet anymore or that Columbus didn't really discover America in the way we were taught.
Fun.
Yeah. We even learned from our kids recently that sloths apparently fart out of their mouths. Who knew?
Yeah.
It just keeps everyone in that mode of questioning what we think we know.
That's great. It makes you question the traditional lecture model in schools, too. I mean, lectures can be engaging, sure. But are they really creating lifelong learners?
The evidence suggests probably not sufficiently. Most college professors, especially in STEM, still lecture for like 80% of class time.
Right.
But if you spend your whole education just receiving information, never really being challenged or given the tools to question it, you don't develop those rethinking muscles.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's why in my own classes, I've started having students do things like create mini podcasts or short talks where they have to challenge some piece of conventional wisdom. It forces a deeper engagement.
And it's okay to embrace confusion in that process.
Huh.
There was this anecdote about a professor who left one class session totally blank. No plan.
Just blank.
Yeah. Invited the students to figure out how to use the time. And one popular idea was writing letters to their freshman selves.
What kind of advice did they give?
Things like, stay open to different majors, don't lock yourself in too early, focus more on relationships than just grades, explore different careers, don't assume you know what you want. That initial confusion that, what do we do now? It became a signal that there was something new to figure out, something important to reflect on.
That sounds like Ron Berger's classroom, the one described in the book.
Yeah.
He wanted his students thinking like young scientists.
Right, the hands-on projects.
Yes, sixth graders testing homes for radon gas, third graders mapping where amphibians live, first graders studying what snails prefer to eat.
Real inquiry.
But the crucial part, I think, was making the classroom a challenge network. They had regular critique sessions.
Where they gave each other feedback.
Yes, but he taught them how to do it. Feedback had to be specific and kind, and suggestions were framed as questions. I'd love to hear why you chose this approach, or have you considered trying? Critiquing the work, not the person. That builds such a powerful culture of learning and revision.
And you see the flip side of that, the failure of that kind of psychological safety in big organizations, like NASA with the Challenger disaster.
All rings.
Right. And later, Columbia with the foam strike and the sensor issues. These weren't just sudden, isolated technical failures. They stemmed from a culture where people maybe felt they couldn't speak up, where small problems were normalized instead of questioned deeply.
So that safety to challenge, to rethink is crucial.
Absolutely. And it's not something you achieve once. Leaders have to model that vulnerability, that openness to being questioned again and again for it to really stick.
Okay, last big area, rethinking our own lives, our careers. The story of Ryan Grant, the neurosurgeon, really hit me.
Yeah, 7 years of residency, tons of debt.
And he enjoys helping people, but he fundamentally regrets that specific path. He got caught in what the book calls escalation of commitment.
Doubling down on a choice, even when it's not working.
Exactly. We invest so much time, money, ego into a plan. It becomes incredibly hard to change course, even if it's the right thing to do. We think grit means sticking it out no matter what.
But sometimes grit can become foolish stubbornness.
Right. Sometimes the grittiest thing you can do is admit it's not working and turn around.
It makes you question that whole, what do you want to be when you grow up? Question we ask kids. Michelle Obama apparently hates that question
Why?
because it implies growing up is finite, that you reach a point where you just are something fixed.
Hmm.
Psychologists call settling too early identity foreclosure.
So locking in too soon.
Yeah. Maybe it's better to encourage kids to think about doing science rather than being a scientist. Focusing on the actions, the interests, keeps things more open, more flexible than adopting a fixed identity.
So for your own life, maybe the advice is throw out the 10-year plan, or at least hold it loosely.
Could be. Maybe plan to just 1 or 2 years ahead. Stay open.
Like the student example, who rethought his idea of a dream partner. He'd always pictured someone super ambitious, but he found a much more fulfilling relationship by letting go of that fixed image and appreciating his partner as she actually evolved.
Allowing people and yourself room to change.
Yeah. When we update our ideas about who people are, it gives them freedom and our relationships room to grow.
And this connects to a final really interesting point about happiness versus meaning. Research suggests that actively pursuing happiness, like making it your main goal, can actually make you less happy.
Really? Why is that?
Maybe because focusing too much on personal pleasure can come at the expense of purpose, meaning, which often comes from contributing to something beyond yourself, from helping others, tends to provide a more lasting sense of well-being. It's less about what you get and more about what you give.
And that custodian, Candace Walker, is such a perfect example of finding meaning by rethinking your role.
The hospital custodian, right.
Yeah. Her official job was cleaning, but she saw it differently. She took it upon herself to comfort grieving families, to make anxious patients laugh, even rushing someone in pain to get help when others weren't responding.
Going way beyond the job description.
Exactly. As she said, no, it's not part of my job, but it's part of me. Rethinking isn't just for huge life decisions. It's about how we approach our daily actions, finding purpose and meaning right where we are, transforming our everyday lives. So as we wrap up this deep dive, the core message really feels like rethinking is way bigger than just updating a few facts or changing an opinion here and there. It's about fundamentally transforming your mindset and maybe ultimately transforming your life. It frees you from those old, potentially unhelpful patterns. It challenges the assumptions you might be clinging to, and it just opens you up to a whole world of new possibilities.
Yeah, and if you take that one step further, it's really about applying a kind of scientific mindset to your whole life, isn't it? Treating your beliefs not as sacred truths to be defended at all costs, but more like hypotheses, things to be curious about, things to test, things you're willing to revise based on evidence. So I guess the question back to you, the listener, is I'm curious, do you agree with all this? And if not, what evidence might change your mind?
That's the perfect closing thought. We really hope you'll engage with these ideas. Maybe pick one of your own cultural truisms, something you just assume is true, and question it this week. Or perhaps try setting up a small challenge network with a friend you trust, where you can critique each other's ideas constructively. Keep thinking, keep questioning,